This is a long story, and it is called
The Dark.
Hello there, whoever decides to read this. I don't really mind if you read this whole thing or not, to be honest. It may drag on, you may get bored, but I honestly don't mind. For me, this is more of a lancing of an old wound. I just need to get some things out of my head and onto ... Well, I would say paper ... I just think I need someone else to hear or read this, so that I know I'm not insane. I have a friend. Or should I say had. We will call him Alex. Hi, I'm Alex.
Yeah.
For the sake of names, and we will call me Anna, just for a point of reference, you see. The kids, they listen to the rap, which gives them the brain damage. To give you some idea of us, who we are as people, I will tell you a little about us. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
We have been friends for years.
Since child space.
Really, ... We grew up together. We played together. We made it through high school together, alive and without being bullied too much.
We made it through high school.
We even went to college together.
We made it through high school. Dead.
Yeah, we made it through. Yeah, alive without being. We even went to a college together.
Oh.
His house was almost my second home. I came from a broken family, you see. My father was a toy. My father was a wretch who drank too much and pumped God knows what into his body. My mother did the best she could, but it all fell apart in the end. It was for the best, really, and my mother was a good woman. Maybe she didn't have the longest temper or the kindest tongue, but she was still my mother. She remarried some years later, and he was not the kindest man either, but things could have been much worse, I suppose. During all of this, his family were their mother and father, still very much in love. Two very kind people who never spoke a word against me or mine. That makes no sense. A well-adjusted brother and sister, both younger, and a lovely house. He was always better looking than me, tall, dark, and handsome.
The brother?
Or what? I don't know, Christian. Or what he grew to be anyway. I always had that slightly scruffy look. Are you a guy or a girl?
I don't know. Anna?
That no amount of hairbrushing and ironing can get rid of. Short girl with blonde hair and an awkward manner with people. He may have been the only reason I made it through my teen years, no matter how bad
Short
things got.
girl.
He always stayed my friend. I guess in the end, that's what was my own downfall. I felt I owed him too much. In a way, our story starts in college. In the south of England, there was a place called Boys Hall. I don't know if that was really its name. I never went there myself. It had an awful reputation of mysterious noises and hauntings. The odd rumor of people going mad at priests that hung themselves. The usual things you hear about haunted places, and of course I scoffed at them, but it had always given me the creeps, so when a group of Alex's friends decided to stay the night, I refused to go with them. In a way, I'm glad, but I'm also sorry. Maybe things could have gone differently, probably not, but maybe. Of course, at the time, the place stood empty. I think it's a guest house now, but I digress. Thus stayed the night on the Saturday, and the next Monday I saw Alex. When I tapped his shoulder, he stood on around with a startled look on his face that, in hindsight, I can only describe as hunted.
Because, the Saturday. We all know the Saturday.
The Saturday. I hate the Saturday. He laughed a shaky little laugh, and seemed genuinely pleased to see me. He told me they'd sat up all night drinking, some of the boys and girls going together, as it was called then, until some bright spark had produced a Ouija board type thing. One of the triangular things with a pencil nib underneath it, right on a sheet of paper. A mixture of alcohol and teenage bravado had made them do it. Foolishly, I asked if anything had written to them, but Alex just shrugged it off and said that all that came out was stupid mumbo-jumbo.
Okay, so wait. Let's go back a couple sentences. Until some bright spark had produced how do you say that? Ugh.
Ouija board.
Ouija board. Period. Type thing. Period.
I don't even care.
What?
I didn't see him very much that week or the next, but when I did see him, he always looked tired, like maybe he wasn't sleeping well or was worried about something. Whenever I questioned him on it, however, he would just shrug it off. Like everything else, pretend everything was alright. Bit by bit, he drifted away from his friends. The cool kids stopped talking to him, and his parents were worried. His sister finally confided it to me that someone had seen him going into a local magic-type shop. You know, the ones with the palm readers, psychics, and magic herbs, all those places. I questioned him about it, and he seemed to get almost angry and told him it was none of my business. He only went there out of curiosity. This unusual anger, the shadows under his eyes, and the furtive way he cast his eyes about as though he was being constantly looking for someone. Just sitting with him made me nervous that I was being watched. After a fair while of similar behavior, we drifted apart. I tried. I really did. I'll always blame myself for not trying harder, but by no means did I just give up. I suppose in a way I convinced myself this was normal. Friends drift apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up. I left college. Left college, majored in fine arts, and got work at a local gallery. Nothing major. Not a particularly big gallery, but I enjoyed the work. Boyfriends came and went, and I lost some of gangly, scruffy look. From time to time, my thoughts would turn to Alex, whether he was happy or not, whether he'd ever settled down, and whether or not he'd ever got past the weirdness, until I bumped into him on the street on day. He looked a little pale, a little haggard, but nothing more you'd expect for someone maybe working 12-hour shift. So I was quite surprised when he told me he'd been signed off work on the condition of paranoid schizophrenia. Still, he had that way of darting his eyes around that made me uncomfortable. His hands stuffed in the pockets of what I noticed was actually quite a scruffy coat hunched over.
I'm glad you didn't mistake that. You would have said his eyes stuffed in his pockets. You were close, but...
But he told me his mother had been asking after me, so I decided to go to dinner the following weekend.
Asking after me?
I don't know. When I arrived at the house, I was little more than a little disturbed. The house seemingly matched Alex's state of decline. The walls could have done with a lick of paint. There was a thin film of yellowed grease on most of the kitchen, a ceiling. The carpets... There's a ceiling!
No, there's double ceilings.
The carpets were ragged and bare in places, and I was shocked to see Alex's mother, a woman who had previously been so proud of hers and her home's appearance, had been taking up smoking and developed a rather nervous manner and was wearing a rather tatty dress without a smudge of makeup on her face. She greeted me warmly enough, but she always seemed to be watching Alex from the corner of her eye. When I inquired after the elder sibling, she looked at him more obviously and told me in a conspiratorial voice that they had moved away and didn't visit often anymore. Then she practically turned tail and ran to the kitchen. Dinner was a sad affair. Everyone seemed on edge except for Alex, for stared morosely at his food and didn't eat a bite. His mother's gaze flickered to him every few seconds as she ate in silence. His father swallowed a few heart tablets and sat picking at his food. I was surprised at how thin he'd become. His skin sallow and gray, and his eyes were infinitely sadder. Gone was the man I remembered of great belly laughs and barbecues in the garden. It saddened me then. It still does when I remember him now. Depressed and anxious to leave, I made my excuses after dinner was over. His mother thanked me effusively and insisted that I must visit again soon. She seemed very desperate, and at the time I wasn't sure why, but now I think maybe she thought I could fix her son.
Take him to a repair shop.
Alex insisted on walking me home, but on the way the conversation turned to him own apartment, which turned out to be closer, and so I agreed to visit. The place he took me to was a dark, dank little flat with mold growing on the walls, newspaper taped over the windows, all the mirrors had been daubed with black paint, strange symbols had been scrawled on the walls, and more paint, and a mattress surrounded with candles sat in the middle of the living room floor. Alex sat cross-legged on the makeshift bed, unwilling to sit on any of the moldering furniture. I stood awkwardly by the door. He stared at the floor, and it stained this way for a good 10 minutes. Finally, I turned to go, and Alex piped up from behind me in a broken little boy's voice. He asked me if I remembered that night I went to the haunted house with his friends. I nodded warily and moved a little closer. A tear rolled down his cheek as he told me he thought it had been her for a long time, but eventually he had realized it was something much, much darker. Puzzled by this cryptic sentence, I rather unwillingly took off my coat and lay it on a nearby chair so that I could sit down and resign myself to a long night. The story he proceeded to tell me chilled me to the bone. I'll try the best I can. I'll try and tell it the best I can from his point of view. Alex's story.
It's you, so.
There were 5 of us that night. I'd invited Anna to come too, but she didn't want to. I guess she was afraid if I had a brain, I would have been there. What the? I would have been too. But I was 21 and stupidly brave. We spent the night in the main hall waiting for something spooky to happen. Became a bit tedious, and it turned out one of the lads had brought a bottle of rum and some Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola. One of the girls had brought a bottle of vodka, and we quickly got a bit That's a fail of a sentence. People started mucking about and pretending it was ghosts, making stupid noises in empty rooms so that I would echo.
I would echo.
Writing on the mirror in the bathroom so that the next person to go in would see it. I was getting a bit late. And one of the girls pulled out a writing Louisa board thing. It was funny at first. Writing out stupid messages to scare each other. A clock somewhere chimed 2 a.m. and the board got faster and faster. The writing getting more and more erratic. Scrawling across the page.
The writing.
The writing
the
getting
story.
More, like this story.
Yeah, the story.
Writing getting more and more erratic, scrawling across the page until the girl stopped giggling and we thought it was just a joke. Then we realized they were scared too. One by one removed our hands, but I kept on writing. Eventually I picked it up, removed it from the paper. It jerked once or twice in my hand. It was still trying to write, but then it was still. We looked at the writing, but at the time it seemed like utter gibberish at the time. In tenebris, eagle me in tenebris, et in anima tuam pro me, kix la de, lan protege. Te mihi sermo domini vobiscum servare non possum. Quod tenebre omnia nihil mini non abstrahor tibi meest animea mea et tim debas considiarum vitae vitue. I hope we don't summon a demon through this. Et in vobis et mihi in tenebris. None of us slept that night. Strange sounds haunted us. Footsteps without feet, voices without mouths, mouths without voices. We huddle around the candles we had brought. It's just before dawn. Tiny handprints appeared along the windows with dull thuds. Cold air swirled through the room, turning our breath to ice. And when the sun rose, it seemed like a bad dream. We laughed it off as kid nerves, but we never spoke of that night again. In face, we really talked. In face, we never really talked again. My friends and I stayed away from each other. Seeing each other just brought back memories of that night.
But that wasn't it.
When I got home, I went straight to the library. I did some thorough research and found out the place was haunted by a ghost of a woman who had been murdered and buried in the foundations dressed as a man. The foundations.
That was haunted by the priest.
The foundations were dressed as a man. I figured we had experienced some sort of haunting by this woman. I passed it off, but over the next few weeks, I began to feel watched everywhere I went. The hairs on my neck constantly stood on end, and my sleep was disturbed by terrible nightmares of a woman in a delicate lace dress leading me down a seemingly endless hallway. Only as I was walking along, I realized the tunnel did have an end, some kind of infernal blackness that somehow seemed to absorb light, and when I turned up to the woman, I could see that the flesh was running away from her skull. Maggots crawled in and out of her lipless grin. One loose eyeball hung from the void of its socket as I tried to pull away her grip. Her flesh slowing away from her hand, and as her skin chafed against mine.
Okay. I'll just, because that was like that began in like I would wake up sweating and unable to sleep.
Where is it?
It begins
where does it
like.
Start? I figured we had experienced.
It begins in the second sentence.
But over the next few weeks, I began to feel watched by everywhere I went.
Don't say it again. Really.
Oh my goodness!
It's like over 8 sentences, at least
8 lines. I would wake up sweating and unable to sleep. I spent most of my time researching hauntings and trying to translate that writing. Many hours spent at the library were fruitless. I became more and more obsessed. Everywhere I went, I seemed to see the woman in the lace, the skin peeling away from her face. She beckoned me. I stopped going out, but she started standing in the street outside my window, so I kept the blinds closed. I had to take down the mirrors when she started standing behind me there. My mother made me see a psychiatrist who diagnosed 3 different disorders before he settled on the schizophrenia and tried to pump me full of mess. Whenever I went to his office, she would just be stood there grinning at me in the mirror behind his head. I moved out of parents' house after my outbursts began to upset me when they would hand a spoon that had a reflection or the curtains were left open. My brother and sister moved away. My father developed a heart condition and I felt it was best if I didn't hurt them anymore. I finally got the cryptic writing translating and it won't repeat here, but it led me to believe whatever was interfering with my life was something more insidious and evil than a lost spirit. Run on sentences. Why this thing latched onto me, I don't know. I sought professional advice, blacked out my windows and mirrors, and painted the protective symbols on my walls to keep away the things that crawl on them at night. The eyes peer at me.
Crawl on who?
Eyes peer at me from dark corners of the rooms, voices whispering to me constantly, and I know I will never escape this thing. I don't know why this thing latched onto me, but it did.
Okay.
Alex is the king of run-on sentences.
At least it's not you.
Okay, now it's back to Anna's story. Suddenly, I realized... Stunned.
Oh, yeah.
I suddenly realized my friend desperately needed help. When I promised to help him, he burst into tears and told me no one had ever believed him before now. I still wince with a little shame when I remember that I thought to myself that I never said I believed him. But over the next few weeks, I helped him clean the place up, remove the mirrors completely when he had hysterics after I tried to scrub them clean, took the newspapers down from the window and painted over the symbols on the walls, and let him keep the various crystals and charms that decorated the room and convinced him that they would thrive at his fear and he needed to get on with his life. We started going outside and having lunch, small trips at first, and whenever I would catch him staring at nothing in terror, I remember not to look, not to feed it, and he would be alright again for a while. That was like 6 lines.
Yeah, I think
One
it's...
day, he got particularly
Same
bad and got distraught when I tried to leave. I offered to stay the night and
to keep
kept
him company.
What the?
I offered this to stay the night to keep him company, and he calmed down. Covered the sofa with some...
Okay, with some clean blanket and settled down for the most terrifying night of my life. Alex slept...
No,
on my life.
like... Sorry.
Alex slept on
My
a mattress
liking.
on the floor by sofa, muttering in his sleep. That moment, I realized something was wrong. When I realized the muttering wasn't coming from him...
The
doorway,
space.
the small hall stood ajar, and the muttering sounds were coming from beyond. Slapping sounds startled me. That's not scary. And I watched in horror as tiny handprints began to thud their way onto the glass of the 3-story window. I jumped up from the couch to wake Alex, and I heard something in the darkness behind me skitter away from my movement. I didn't know what to do, so I froze to the spot, too frightened to turn around and look at what was behind me. I was too hypnotized by the eyes I could see reflected in the window, peering over my shoulders. Cold fingers walked across my skin and whispers were breathed directly into my hair, wafting my hair.
Around my face, one sentence.
Around my face. Something began tugging at the material at my trousers, and at that moment my resolve broke and I dove for the safety of my blanket, pulling it up over my head. I shivered as I watched the light of the candles be extinguished one by one through the weave of the material.
So the writer can make like 9 sentence long sentences and then make a sentence like around my face.
The floor was creaking directly beside my makeshift bed as though something heavy was stood there. A deep, wet rumble issued from the creature, and the gusts of air stank of rotting fruit and meat. Squeezing my eyes tightly shut, I prayed for dawn. I don't know how long I lay there with Alex oblivious on the floor only feet away as cold dead things pawed at me, hissing. Things crawled on the wall above me, had in shrill little voices
Dead things?
giggled in the dark. The next morning, I apologized to Alex that I hadn't believed him and advised to see a priest, try and get an exorcism or something. Although I didn't really think that it would do much good to my heart, he did. He went to see a priest and they visited his house. They performed sort of ritual that cleansed him in the house. They visited several more times to make sure the activity had returned by Alex's life had seemingly returned to normal. In several years, Alex got married. I stood in as the best man, even though I'm a lady. He ended up having 2 beautiful children with his new wife, and over the years we drifted apart again. But that good kind of drift, where you're both settled and happy and life takes its course. I was glad for my friend and happy that his torturous youth was finally
over.
7 years later, after his marriage, I got a letter from his wife. Alex had shot himself. He had come home early from work, sat in his study, and put a gun in his mouth. No one knew where he got the gun. Walmart. And the only letter he left simply read, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Anna knows. She saw it too." And the nimbus ego me. I'm not reading that again.
No.
All my love. Sometimes I see shadows in my mirrors too. Sometimes I hear a voice in the dark of night. Sometimes I would dearly like to get myself into.
No.
It feels good to write it down, just so someone else knows that we weren't insane.
I still think you're insane.
In the dark, I do thy life shall be for me in the dark, because the light of God, not you, to me will defend the word of the Lord, cannot save you, that darkness, all things, that does not distract you through me. My soul is nothing to me, and in the days end the days of thy life, and in you shall be to me in the dark. The end.
That's only good as been a sentence in the story.
Okay, I have one word. Run on. This whole thing was probably like 10 sentences.
One comment. Ah!
Your story will drive me crazy if you don't capitalize properly and proper grammarization. This site will probably delete your story because of this. You should probably proofread your stuff. That is exactly...
By the why.
That's exactly what I think about this. I mean, that's
I
a perfect description of it.
Just nothing.
Anyway,
As well as the plot isn't that great.
This has been Awful Creepypastas. Anyway, have a good night or day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for watching Awful Creepypastas. If you enjoyed this here video, like, comment, subscribe, and watch my other videos, because they're pretty good too. That's pretty much all I have to say. So, I will see you all on the next installment of Awful Creepypastas. Bye-bye.